why did I get into art is I think I've always kind of liked new things and the next idea. And I believe art by nature is progressive. It should always be seeking the next thing. As I got older, I began to understand that art was more of a language, that we're trying to visually describe an emotion, a feeling, or an idea. So as artists, we want to offer a perspective and spur a dialogue about things. And I think that is really powerful if you can just get people in a room together to begin to start talking about something. And I think that's what art is good for, is showing new ideas. There's an art critic that talked about, he said that once an idea or a movement in art becomes commonly accepted by everyone, it's time for art to go on and do the next thing. And it's like with any area of study, we want to find the new thing after we've perfected what we're learning currently. Not a whole lot of people are going to understand it. It's like if you always relate to science, like what's the next greatest discovery that just came out today? Well, the general public doesn't understand this yet. But when they do, then it becomes common and we can move on to the next thing. Like I said, I think a lot of great artists are going to start to come out of new free societies. Like whenever, North Korea's government falls, I think there'll be a lot of people with a message that can help other societies. And I think maybe that's why the United States has been really just a hub for the arts, just because free thinking is, I think, more readily accepted here than anywhere else in the world. I've kind of admired artists that critique culture. Like Andy Warhol took contemporary figures and he made them flat and he repeated them over and over again. The idea was to show American culture as flat and two-dimensional, and the more he repeated it, the less value was in that object. And we've seen American culture exported in these countries that don't accept it in the same way it's accepted maybe here or friendly states like Canada or Australia, places like that. But I want to raise questions about what does this American pop culture do when it's in somewhere like Saudi Arabia? We expect to be able to transplant our pop culture or our democracy in these places where sometimes it's beyond our own nature to obtain those things. And in my travels, I've been to about maybe 13, 14 countries in the past 5 years, and it seems like the part of American culture that has the financial legs enough to reach into like third world countries is like our pop culture, our top 40 type artists. Like in Uganda, I've seen like Ugandan huts with Tupac painted on the side. It's a really interesting dialogue to be had, and my job as an artist isn't to give you all the facts, but I want to raise a perspective about what's a healthy amount of cultural impact and cultural tension. It's something I feel is important to talk about, especially now. Maybe we're not in the Industrial Revolution, but we certainly are in a time of great progress as far as being connected to each other more than we ever have. Like Warhol took contemporary figures, I'm taking figures from this monumental period in American history and showing the power they have in the framework of a different society. For instance, I have Japanese versions of Elvis records. And what I'm doing is trying to raise a discussion about what those figures become when they're planted in another society. Yeah, I was thinking something like American hot wax. And I like, the play on words, like wax being like, a record, but also something used in cosmetics, and hot being, famous or desirable, but also means stolen. Because a lot of my work has to do also with the people I'm choosing to kind of poke fun at, like the Elvises and the Johnny Cashes, all have borrowed heavily from different cultures for their own sound. Elvis and Johnny Cash talk about how they borrowed a lot from black gospel. And it's interesting how like those African roots are filtered through honky-tonk and through these white figures and then delivered to the public and then are circling back around to the third world. It's an interesting conversation, and I think it's something to really be considered. Ultimately, the art that I want to make is about cultural tension. I want to create a dialogue about the harm and value that can come from cultures impacting each other. I want the viewer to understand that maybe the ideologies that we as Americans almost force on the whole world aren't the best thing anymore. Maybe it's time to get used to an idea that we're possibly living in a post-American era where the time of, our parties and our clubbing and our overindulgence aren't the healthiest thing for the rest of the planet. There was a time when I believed, that every person in the world wanted to be an American. As I've grown older and I've been able to experience all these other cultures, that there's a lot more deliciousness to these other parts of the planet than I even realize that are possibly better than home. I'm anxious to see what those cultures and how they can impact me in the same way. All of a sudden, I felt like this need. I've got to experience everything as much as I possibly can. Like, I have to see everything. I feel almost an urgency to see and do as much as I can that's going to bring us happiness. And I think the meaning of life is to pursue happiness. And like I said before, with the time that I'm given, I want to make art and help people.